Thrilled to see all of you. My name is Blake Cohn. I am the Executive Director of the National Network of Schools in Partnership. And we are thrilled you're all here. We have made it to another week of distance learning and figuring this all out for our kids. And I'm thrilled to have Christen here from Nobis Project. She is kind enough to take the time today to share with us a protocol or a framework of student reflection, specifically around that's useful at this point in time while we're in distance learning. So much for taking the time out of your day and your week to think for a few minutes about what reflection for students can look like, and to take this back and see how it works with your kids. Christen, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Glad to be here, everyone. Thank you for having us, spending your afternoon, or afternoon or early morning, depending on where you are in the country. I am gonna move into my PowerPoint, and this will be, like Blake said, shared with you later too. And I'm happy to share this actual PowerPoint link if that's helpful as well. So Nobis Project is a educational nonprofit that our mission is to inspire purpose, pivot mindset, and activate agency. And this is very much centers around the goal of what our work here today is about, and kind of share with you some strategies that we use with our active engagement. Historically, we've mostly been doing professional development around service learning, global citizenship education, and social justice. And we are starting to move into doing student-facing activities and programming too. But what I wanted to start us off in our conversation today is, how do I prepare for teaching about inequity, social justice, and caring? And the real answer to this comes in how we unpack the experiences that our students are having. I know we normally are creating engaging opportunities for our students in their communities that they live in. And with this virtual distance, there is this myriad of different ways that our students are both receiving information, handling their emotions, watching how their parents and other family members are engaging with all the realities of what's going on in the world. And what I wanted to translate was, how do we take some of the ways that we might do this in the classroom and move them into this virtual space? So the way that Nobis does this is that we frame everything using this big ideas framework. Every other year, we hold a think tank, and we bring together educators across pre-K through college. We bring academics from special fields, and then community partners together to list. We're listening to educators. What is it that's not working for you that you wish you had a resource for? And then in our think tanks, we develop those resources and share them freely with educators afterwards. And the big ideas came out of our first think tank. 5 of them. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. But the idea of this framework is that these can be the perfect touch points of figuring out how to answer the difficult questions, that students might have about what's going on in their realities today, or that the social injustices that they might see when engaging in community partnership work, and just kind of unpacking the imperfections of our world. So the first one is history. Nobis defines history as a collection of various analysis and imaginative interpretations of the human experience that seeks to explain how society has changed over time. I always ask if there's any historians in the room and see whether or not they agree or disagree with our answer here, or our definition. But one of the key piece is that it's not static and it's directional, multi-directional, right? So me as the presenter in this space, and you as the viewer, or whatever kind of distracting thing you might have in the background, you're experiencing this moment in time differently than I'm experiencing this moment in time. And that's the case for any historical marker. And part of what shapes that is our collective identity, that each of us has these multiple different identities that align us with a different group. And through that identity of our understanding of a shared past, of those different groups that we belong to, it shapes how we interact with people, often in ways that we're not aware. I usually tell the story about I am white female, a middle class, highly educated, come from long generations of being highly educated, Irish Catholic background. And my grandparents, who were Catholic Irish, had always talked about the Protestants and how they burnt the family farm back in Ireland. And I became really anxious when I got accepted into a program to study in England about telling my grandparents about the fact that I was going to go study in this other place, and wasn't really sure if I was going to be welcomed when I went to England because of my Irish ancestry and these stories. My grandparents had never lived in Ireland. They never visited Ireland, but it was a story that was passed down over generations that then translated into how I saw and interacted, or assumptions that I held about how I might be interact in spaces. So collective identities have this really long stretching history that then influences. And we as educators bring those into the classroom, and then our students bring them into the classroom. And having awareness of these helps us understand how we might be seeing history in different ways. So the next big idea is power. And here, this is the social force, degree of impact a person, institution, or system has in relationships to others' beliefs, behaviors, or values. And a key piece here is that we usually talk about power as power over, but power also exists as power with and power within. So for those of you who have those students who have a severe emotional reaction to learning about injustice, and they start to shut down, or that questioning of what could I do, is that through historical examples, we can lean back on history, we can show examples of when people have worked together to overcome injustices. And so it's an opportunity to look at power as a vehicle for agency, and not always as a system of oppression. It does, of course, allow us to unpack systems of oppression, and that becomes this other piece of power, which is privilege, or the unearned power. And privilege operates on these personal, interpersonal, cultural, and institutional levels by giving preferential treatment to one group while withholding it from another. And that's the key piece. Preferential treatment to one group while withholding it from another. A lot of what Nobis's work has been of late is supporting educators and having difficult conversations with their students about privilege. It's not something that we in the United States like to talk about. It makes us very uncomfortable when we're thinking about talking about race or class, or different levels of ability, or sexual orientation, or all of these different categories of difference. But not until we start engaging with those and acknowledging where these systems exist will we be able to unpack it. So and Nobis, and part of what we will share with you today are some strategies of how I might do this with my students. And another important piece of privilege is to recognize that it's characteristically invisible to those who have it. So if you are benefiting from the privileges, you're getting this preferential treatment, you're not really likely to know that it's even happening. And that's another piece of why it's so important for us to start unpacking it and making it visible. So the third big idea is relationships. And here is where it's so important that we are listening first, that we're trying to understand the dynamics of a problem and where it started. There's this wonderful TED Talk called Shut Up and Listen. It's about this Italian gentleman is talking about him being in his early 20s and working for NGOs across the continent of Africa. He's doing work in Zambia in this one community, and they don't have food security. So he says, we're gonna teach them how to grow food. And so they go and they get seeds from Italy, which is weird in its own right. And they bring them back and they try to get the locals to help plant. They want nothing to do with it. So they pay them. And now they're patting themselves on the back for giving them a job. And they start to grow, and they're getting bigger and bigger. And the storyteller is talking about how, tomatoes in Italy are this big, but in Zambia, they're this huge, and they're just about ready to be picked. And in the middle of the night, there's a wild noise. They come out in the morning, and all of the crops are gone. They've completely been decimated. And the Italians are running around hysterical. What happened? What happened? And the locals are like, well, it was the hippos. What do you mean it was the hippos? Well, that's why we don't grow food. Why didn't you tell us that? Well, you never asked, right? So the people most impacted by the problem are most likely to know what the solution is. And in the US, we do very little modeling of this. If you think about if our local governments, our state governments, our federal government, of asking the people most impacted by the problem, what is it that they need? And so if we can start modeling this for students, we'll be in really great shape for creating the next generation of policy reform. But it's also important to recognize that in these relationships, the ones that we're building with our community members, let alone our students, that we're finding ways for them to be reciprocal, where both parties are really set to benefit. And in this time right now, it's so important that we're reaching out to any of those community partnerships that we've had, even if we've maybe been out of touch with an organization that our students have gone and volunteered with, that we're checking in with them and listening to what their needs are, or just being available to listen to them. So the fourth big idea is global citizenship. And here it's this combination of civic engagement, that we have a duty to engage in our society at any age. And we have that duty, that social responsibility, because of our shared fate and our interconnectedness. And the COVID-19, the pandemic, has really illustrated our interconnectedness in a way that I think for this generation will be very profound, and helping them understand how closely tied we are to one another, and how and I just see really great opportunities for unpacking what responsibilities we have as humans on the earth to one another, and unpacking the choices that people are making at the moment in policy decisions. So the last big idea is cultural responsiveness. And here is where we are listening to other people's thoughts, feelings, experiences without judgment. We're trying to work that muscle of withholding judgment and developing a deep respect for everyone. And my favorite piece of this is that we're developing the skills to analytically process conflicting sets of values. So it's that cognitive dissonance, right? I call this the world peace idea, right? So if I can hold my ideals really highly, but still hold a place for you to have different ideals and live in the same space, then we'd have world peace. And cultural responsiveness is the skill building that allows us to work towards understanding across difference. So that's our big ideas framework. And the way that this can be used, and the way I use it in my classroom, is I use it as a mapping tool. So when I'm thinking about what exercises or activities that I'm going to have my students interact with, or and especially the reflection questions that I'm doing both before we engage or after, or and during, I'm mapping out, have I asked a question about history? Where are we unpacking power? What have we done to practice our listening skills? And how are we evaluating whether or not we did listen well this time, etc. And so the goal here is critical reflection, which goes beyond just kind of a typical synthesize or summary of what we've done, but it really is about making experiences, reflection experiences that help make meaning of the experience, that are descriptive, analytical, and critical of what that experience was. It adds depth and breadth to experience. It builds the connections between the course content and the experience, and it integrates into any experiential learning activity inside or outside the classroom. So what I'd like to do quickly, because I want to make sure we're maximizing a lot of time for conversation about what's working in your classrooms, and show you a reflection model that you could use virtually too. So I'm going to show you some activities that you could use to facilitate conversations around any of the big ideas. So the first set is thinking about, before we go into engaging with community partnership work, is the best places to start is with ourselves. And doing this both as an educator before you're interacting with your students, but then also guiding your students through these experiences. So examples can be like writing a letter to a future self. What do you anticipate to get out of this experience? Or, you know, in this time of uncertainty right now, it'd be very interesting to have students write letters about future self and what you want them to remember about your future self, to remember about this experience now, what you're learning about yourself and your family and your community. Another one is timelines. So this is when you outline your first memories of class or race, or a time when you stood up against racism or classism. And so it's thinking about your interaction with some of the different topics. And depending on how you're engaging in community, you may be focusing on classism or transportation access, food supply chains, and you could make a timeline about your interactions with those things before starting to think about the bigger picture and how other people get involved. The story of my name exercise I'm going to show you here in a second. And then there's a backpack, which you ask students to put different items in their backpack to represent their identities. And this you could do virtually, where you're asking them to pull objects from their house that represent different identities that they have. It could be very literal, like a soccer ball, or it could be philosophical, like this stone because it's round and smooth, and that's how I show my exterior to the world, or, you know, so any different ways that they want to think about their different identities. And the activity is a rich opportunity to see the ways that we're connected in different ways. Here is the story of my name activity, where you could, in breakout groups virtually, have students tell the history of their names, and they answer these different prompts. And each person is given 2 or 3 minutes to share, and their partner is supposed to not interrupt. Zoom is creating a lot of opportunity for learning how to just listen. And so they would just listen during that space and hold that space for them, not ask any follow-up questions. And it's really an exercise to practice our listening skills. And here is how we might take the question, map critical reflection questions to that activity. The pulse taker activity, if you had your list of all of your student names, and you could go through in your Zoom class quickly and call out each person's name, especially if you were doing it in a pattern so they always knew who was going to come next. You can do this pulse taker, where you ask for them to give 1 word about how the activity made them feel, and then everyone goes around the space very quickly to give that 1 word. And then what you observe about the activity, and then looking for those connections into the big ideas. And so depending on your age group too, you might modify this. With our younger groups, we're often just introducing only 1 or 2 of the big idea concepts to smaller people, those kindergartens and through like 3rd grade. And then the bigger, our older students then can be introduced to all of the big ideas. So here are the next set of activity ideas. So pivoting mindset. So the first, we're starting with self, and we're inspiring purpose, right? We're figuring out how we are connected into community. Whereas these are about kind of shifting how we see the world. And our job as educators then is to facilitate that shift or that questioning, and then to foster them helping to find answers to why we have these uncertainties. And here, one of the things is looking at systems, different power systems of oppression. And I have this list that I came up with my colleague about some of the different systems that have been really exposed because of COVID-19. And depending on what your community is, if you're urban or rural, some or more of these might be more apparent. So with the public transportation system, I live in Savannah, Georgia. We don't have a very good public transportation infrastructure, but many people need to take public transportation to access the food stores, the grocery store. And now it's running on limited schedules, and the grocery stores have limited hours, and it's just shrinking your ability, if you also have to be someone who is working certain hours of the day, your ability to get to food. And so the supply chains, as some of the meat packaging plants have been closing, it's showing us this kind of interconnectivity of our systems. Access to technology, this inequity that we're having across different education sectors about your access to education, what it means for our frontline workers during this, and whether or not they have a choice or feel like they have a choice for their health to not be employed or to be employed at this time, to choose not to work at the grocery store right now. The healthcare systems, of course, expose lots of different inequity of care. The fact that the tests are free is an amazing component to that, because there's so many people in the United States without consistent access to healthcare that might not choose to get a test because of the cost, right? And evaluating those different realities. So, and the systems, the other ones that I have at the top, there's a power privilege continuum that I can send you resources on if you're interested. It's a lot of different cards with different names on it. And I'm going to show you the dominant narrative activity here in a moment. But soundscapes is another great way of, especially for younger students, of introducing the ideas of interconnectivity. It comes out of theater education, where you would have different groups of your students in Zoom who are assigned to do a different sound, and you could be emulating any type of place. So maybe you're thinking about public transportation, and in our town we have trains, and so we're going to replicate all the different sounds that you might normally hear at a train station. And so some people will be the chugga chugga sound, and then other ones will be the woo woo sound, and then others can just be the people talking on the waiting for their train. And then you as a teacher can orchestrate your, you can hold up a sign that says group A, group B, group C, and you can increase or decrease their volume and could create a cacophony of sound, but that's creating a soundscape of a different place and bring something to life. And it shows how all of these different pieces fit together to create the system or the experience in the train station. Another idea is there are a lot of really fabulous online, and some of them are free, and some of them your schools might have access to, this Coggle mind map where multiple students can get inside a brainstorming software and everyone can add at the same time. So it's kind of like using Google Docs, except that it's in a brainstorming model. And so if you want to share and come up with ideas about what we're seeing and experiencing, this can be a great tool for the students to be able to build that together. And almost to the end of my sharing of activities, and then we want to listen to you guys. The dominant narrative, here's a definition. It's an explanation or story that's told in service of the dominant social group's interests and ideologies, and it gains its dominance through repetition, the apparent authority of the speaker, and the silencing of alternative accounts. And an example would be the narrative of Rosa Parks. And normally I'd stop here and ask you to tell me what the dominant narrative of, she was tired, she was sitting in the back of the, she was sitting in the front of the bus instead, and she refused to get up, and that it wasn't, planned. It just was this one woman who then became this icon for a movement. And in reality, many of those pieces of the dominant narrative are not true. She was an activist before she protested. She was very involved in the NAACP. There were other women before her who had sat on the bus and refused to get up, but this particular woman had a child out of wedlock, so she didn't seem to be the best role model for a national campaign to bring this to attention. She wasn't sitting in a whites only section. She was sitting in a section that was in this in-between, and that you were supposed to stand up if a white person came, but it wasn't the whites only section. And she wasn't tired, she was making a stand. So there are these stories that get told, but when we unpack the different, here's critical reflection questions that go with that, we think about when we've heard this, how is it perpetuated? In this instance, education is also one of the ways that it's perpetuated, and the way that it appears in history books. And it benefits the dominant social group by being a story of an unplanned event, right? What's the word I'm looking for? It weakens the narrative of the organizational strength of the civil rights movement when it's told that just one person did this thing and then it made everything happen. Where you're not thinking about the power width that was involved in orchestrating a media campaign to make sure it got attention and that it led to the future events. So there are very specific ways where keeping it as a lesser story continues to perpetuate or it undermines the power of what the civil rights movement was actually able to capture. Okay, so what I'd like us to do is to try some reflection activities in our virtual space. And I have a particular model that I have borrowed from my amazing experience with ICENE, the winter conference that I attended, and George with the center, George and John with the center, which is a collaborative public-private partnership between Catlin Gable School and the center, as it's called in Portland, Oregon, have come up with this SOS reflection model that we have adopted and want to share with you today. The first piece of it is these kind of community norms. We're going to break out into groups, and then we're going to have the opportunity to go through this sharing model and then into wider conversation. But the norms is that we want to make sure we're speaking from the I perspective of any of our experiences, that we're listening, and then respond, that we're being fully present as best we can in our virtual space, that we get right to it, right? We speak plainly, as the Friends schools like to say, and say what's core, and that we're going to suspend judgment of ourselves and others. And then we're going to go through these 3 rounds, and we have some fabulous volunteers to lead your breakout groups, and I'm very appreciative of them stepping into it. And so the first round, you're going to come up, and they're going to take you through each of these rounds, but just so you know what's coming, you're going to do that pulse taker, 1 word to describe what you're bringing into the circle. Could be about your experience of what's going on with you right now, or your distractedness or excitement after listening to me. And then round 2, you're going to take a breath, think about your senses, your 5 senses, and then in a tweet length, so just, you know, a sentence or 2, 1 sensory experience that you've had today that's sticking with you. And you can hear we're kind of really paying attention to self in our reflection before we move into the content part. And then the SOS component at the end will take 2 to 3 minutes, and your facilitator will keep a timer for you to write or sit and reflect about the following 3 questions. Anything that you've noticed about yourself today, or anything that you've learned or noticed about others, and anything you've learned or noticed about systems. And we've given some introductory ideas of systems, right? These interconnected pieces. And this is designed to be used with your students. So you want to make sure that they have an understanding of what you mean by systems. And then after you go through these 3 rounds of sharing, there's an opportunity for crosstalk. This is built off of the Native American tradition of talking circles, where you normally would have a talking piece and you're making sure that only 1 person is talking when they're having it at a time. I haven't figured out how to do a talking piece virtually yet, but Shoshana has one. She's showing us hers. For those of you who can see her. But maybe if you have a piece at home, you can hold something as you're talking as we go through. So I will end there for right now, and Blake's gonna help us split into our breakout groups. We're just gonna wrap up. I wanted to share with you our contact information here. Like I said, with those think tanks that we create, there is a lot of free resources, additional activities and lessons created and tested by educators under resources on our website. So feel free to check that out. And it was exciting to hop in and out of the groups. I think that what I love about this is it humanizes the experience, and then, but it does, and some of the groups were able to start to talk about systems a little bit, allow you to start thinking outside of yourself too. And asking those wondering questions, which lead to great research opportunities or deeper conversations. I wonder, so I welcome you to look into, if you want to go deeper in this work, we offer intensive summer PD opportunities to do immersive engagement experiences. And we're hosting our think tank this year. If anybody is interested, just let me know. I wonder if there's any last sharings, if anybody wanted to share or takeaways.
No, I wasn't here when you first started. Are the slides that you projected, are they going to be available to us?
Yes, and the recorded session too, so you can go back to the whole
Thank
thing.
you. Thank you.
One thing that worked great in the groups was for you to name the next person who's going to go after you. Was the good facilitation technique. Mm-hmm. And then in one of the groups we talked about how having breakout groups as a facilitator, sometimes you feel like you're not giving all the attention that you need to. But this SOS model, when we've used it, students have facilitated with really great success, especially if you're using it over and over, because then they know the formula and they know how to jump right into it. So that's an option for older students.
Christen, can you just repeat the SOS acronym? I mean,
Sure. Self, others, systems.
Got it. Thank
With
you.
those last three questions. Learned about myself, learned about others, learned about systems.
Do you have suggestions for, we are not allowed to use Zoom at our school because of security issues and privacy. Do you have, Google Meet is what we're on now, and it's just, I just love Zoom because I love the breakout rooms. Do you have other suggestions for if we can't do the breakout rooms for being able to do some of these? Because with a large group, I've got 21 students in my advisory. I find it really hard to give my students a voice, and I've thought about breaking them up, maybe have a talk to a group each day or something like that.
I think that not looking at other systems that would allow breakout groups, I think splitting them up is probably your best. I don't know if other people have suggestions.
There are comments on here that say that Google Meet is updating and that they've used different meets for different kids, you know, scheduling different sort of outlets, smaller groups. Outlets isn't the right word, but you know what I mean, different invitations for smaller groups of kids.
So Google Meets actually said that soon they will have the breakout rooms like Zoom. So you can keep using Google Meet since they're familiar with it. But it's soon, it's coming really soon.
I want to say also Microsoft Office has also a Teams platform that has breakout groups as well.
Oh, cool.
And if you aren't trying to like actually talk, I mean, I know it's good to see people's faces, but I've been doing some stuff with my kids on Slack, which is like a messaging system, but you can also, it's free, and you can also upload documents and stuff. So it's kind of a good like educational resource tool, but also it's basically like texting, but within a small group. So that's like a good way to like get kids thinking. So it might be a way to like do different Slack channels while they're on a Zoom or while they're on Google Meets. I don't know how that would work, but my seniors really enjoyed it, and I've used it with younger kids too.
Slack. Yes, that's correct. That's how you spell it. We are also, we have been using this, and I don't sit in a school, so I don't know what the regulations are for it, but and this is a great opportunity to remind you that you should join us. It's called a Mighty Network. And it's a really great way to share and create breakout groups of conversation. There's no video face-to-face, but it's a really amazing way to create community. And we have just launched that for ourselves for NNSP. There's a link on our website, and I will include an invitation in the email that I push out with all of this information, just so that you all can join us. But I have been asked by other places if they would consider using it for children. And I can't say yes or no, but it's something to explore if you're looking for a way to communicate. We're running out of time, and I'm super aware of people's time and on Zoom. I want to remind you all, well, first off, thank you so much, Christen. This was awesome. Sharing all of this was fantastic. I think it's really tangible, and I love the breakout rooms. They're like my favorite part of every week. Next week on Wednesday at a different time, at 6 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Pacific time, we are hosting a conversation that is supposed to be for faculty and some members of their student government, to talk about how students can activate to create a sense of community both within their school community and honoring their community partners that their school has. So this is a first for us to invite kids to these conversations. I think it's a fantastic idea. Anybody is welcome. And so the link is on our website, and it will be pushed out in all the same general ways. And I want you to join our Mighty Network. And then we have a bunch of summer opportunities, both for students and for adults, available. They're on our website. I won't bore you with them now, but while you're while you're fiddling around later, check them out. We're very excited about some of the things we're being able to pull together online. And with that, Christen.
We'll thank our facilitators.
Oh, of course.
For volunteering with us too. That would be great.
Thank you so much to all of our facilitators. And I'm sorry that we missed Shayna, whose daughter fell off our swing set when we got started. And I hope to see you all here in your little boxes on my computer screen in the future. It is such a highlight every week to see you and to communicate and share and just connect. So thank you all so much. And I will see you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.